Thank you. 3 weeks ago, my sister, brother, and myself helped my parents move out of our childhood home, the place that we were connected to for the last 40 years or so in Vermont, which is a very small place nestled in between New York City and Montreal, the northeast part of the US. The running joke when we were kids was that in Vermont there are always more cows than there are people. So it's that sort of an environment. The Vermont of the 1950s and 60s was very small. Picture green rolling hills, some mountains, small lakes. It looks a little bit like the area outside of Oslo, sort of going in towards Telemark. Something started to change in the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s. Companies like IBM and Digital and General Electric moved in and brought with them educated engineers and their young families who built homes and built more schools and generated a tremendous amount of activity. Shiny new neighborhoods, new cars, lots of activity. Vermont evolved, it became a different place. At the end of that weekend when we had helped my parents move out of that beloved house, my father and I were driving to the airport, and this is a road that we've driven together very many times, and just looking out the windows and noticing things that I had talked about when I was a kid. You know, there was the place where there used to be that burnt-out tractor you wouldn't shut up about, Rick. Stuff like that. But we noticed that something's different now. There aren't as many bright lights in the windows. The houses aren't new and shiny anymore. The paint is flaking off. There aren't as many children running around outside. There are things left in people's yards that you don't typically leave out in your yard if you're proud of the place where you're living. So things had changed. This is one of very many places in the world where business brought exponential growth and then moved on, driven by metrics that promote short-term, narrow gain over long-term shared value. So when business does move on, and the communities created by this growth begin to decline, problems arise. We start to see things like joblessness, increasing inequality, substance abuse, and crime. Most of us think that it isn't business's job to be concerned about those sorts of issues. I mean, that's what government is for, right? Government is supposed to pay attention to and fix things like this. And yet, of the 100 largest economic entities on the planet, of the 100 largest, I say it again because it shocks me, 69 are corporations. So it seems very clear that we need to put behind us this outdated notion that businesses are not expected to help solve social problems. The irony here, though, is that businesses live and die by the demand created by viable communities populated with viable consumers. So you could almost say that this behavior, this attitude, is cannibalistic. This is not just true, I would argue, for the businesses that cut and run from places like Vermont. It's true of our entire growth model. The world has seen more growth in the last 50 years than in the last 10,000. And with that growth, we've seen improvements in things like health, educational attainment, and living standards. Those are just a few. That list goes on and on and on. And yet there are signs that this model is becoming obsolete and completely unfit to lift humanity to the next level. Exhibit 1, the rise of youth unemployment. In Italy, which is the 4th largest country in the Eurozone and the 7th largest in the world, over 30% of young people who are working age are unemployed. Exhibit 2, the Indian story. Much has been made about India's growth potential. And global business has flocked there, and once they've gotten there, they've really struggled. And the reason for that is because we have vastly overestimated the Indian consumer's buying power. Now, interestingly, the reason for that, another shocking number, of the 1.3 billion people who live in India, only 78 million of them are considered middle class. Middle class defined as earning more than $10 a day. Going back a couple of speakers, which again is another shocking number for us. So 6% of the Indian population is considered middle class. Exhibit 3, planetary boundaries. we're tracking towards somewhere between 3 and 4 degrees warming. We are using up natural resources with astonishing rapidity. Every year, we exhaust our annual budget faster and faster. In 2017, it was exhausted in August. Each year, there's a competition to figure out when it is going to be exhausted. We don't know yet this year. Chances are it's somewhere between now and August. I could go on and on. The crazy thing is that we have the ability to address these problems. We have the brains, hopefully. We have the technology and the money. It's just that all of these resources are locked up in systems where they're working on the wrong things, or sometimes even creating new problems. So now I'm going to say something that's a little bit sacrilegious. Despite all of the problems that they've created, I believe large businesses are vital to our ability to create a saner, fairer, and more sustainable growth model. To some of you, this may sound a little bit like I'm cursing in church. You may feel you've escaped from business maybe just by the skin of your teeth. You may feel that you've chosen to do something more valuable with your time and your talent. And you could be right. But I've spent the last 18 years in business and the last 6 working with some of the largest in the world. At Xynteo, where I work, we deliberately work with incumbents because we believe that given their size, they're the most powerful instruments of change. 2 quick examples of this power. I've spoken about Vermont, so now I'm going to speak a little bit about Norway. In 1996, the Troll A platform was towed to its new home in the North Sea. It was among the largest and most complex engineering projects ever undertaken. It still is. It is also the largest object to ever be moved across the surface of this planet by humanity. Business did that. On March 10th, 2018, SpaceX launched Falcon Heavy. Some of you might have watched it on YouTube. Sending a Tesla and David Bowie's Spaceman into space. Man, I couldn't resist. And then simultaneously landed both of those reusable booster rockets back on Earth. Business did that too. So business has the scale we need. They have the resources, they have the reach, they have the capabilities, and the competence. But they need a radically different view of what success looks like. And that could be where social entrepreneurs come in. They measure success very differently, taking not just profit into account, but also positive returns to society. There are a few things that typically hold businesses back, though, from doing this. One is their singular focus on shareholder value. And this is despite that focus being acknowledged by one of its strongest advocates, Jack Welch, as, and I quote, one of the dumbest ideas in the world. Yet it continues to drive that exploitative behavior. 2, their focus on short-term opportunity blinds them from seeing the market potential of solving big problems. And 3, too many businesses allow themselves to be defined by their product instead of by their purpose, failing to see how their capital and their capabilities can address different problems as the future unfolds. So I'd like to share just an example of the impact of some of these metrics we're talking about, a reason for hope, and then 3 ways that we might help. So when it goes wrong, and we've heard a little bit about this example already today, it looks something like this. So sometimes policymakers and governments succeed in trying to set new metrics, but the fundamental metrics of business still overpower them. So Volkswagen falls within the top 25 of those 100 economic entities that I mentioned. It competes, literally swapping places back and forth with Toyota to be the largest auto manufacturer in the world. When government reacted to the increasing threat from climate change, they imposed much more strict regulations on emissions from cars and trucks. Volkswagen responded with clean car campaigns, including a range of small cars that ran on clean diesel. My family driven by the desire to do the right thing, bought and drove 3 of them. I was one of the drivers. We later found out that the software installed in those vehicles allowed it to cheat when it was on the test bench and succeed against those new emission standards, but then turned off when we drove the car back and forth to school and kindergarten, so that we dramatically exceeded the emission standards. When this was discovered, Volkswagen took a huge brand hit. I feel very differently about Volkswagen now than I did before that happened. Volkswagen in the US alone was forced to repurchase 350,000 cars, which sounds like a lot of cars to me, and ultimately paid over $30 billion in fines, right? So that's an example of what the wrong metrics do. It's important to understand that while $30 billion sounds like a lot of money to you and me, it's actually not that much money to Volkswagen. But there are reasons for hope. There are things that are improving with regard to this question around shifting metrics. Benefit corporations are an interesting place to look. There's some very well-known examples like Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, and 7th Generation. The largest, though, is European. Danone is transforming itself into the first multinational benefit corporation. It's a producer of yogurts and many other types of food products. When they acquired Whitewave in the US in 2017, they became a $6 billion per year company, which is a reasonably sized outfit. They're on their way to becoming the first multinational B Corp now. They have 6 country subsidiaries so far that are certified, and they continue to move forward on that. So the common factor in many of these transformations is that they are led by leaders who see the value of incorporating better and more holistic metrics. Shareholders don't necessarily demand them, but they can accept them if they're shown that they add value and they don't detract. So the 2014 Harvard study, and I quote, "High sustainability companies significantly outperform their counterparts over the long term, both in terms of stock market and accounting performance." This next part is a little bit geeky, but I think it's just worth sharing because it tells us about what types of companies, right? The outperformance is stronger in sectors where the customers are individual consumers rather than businesses, where the companies compete on the basis of brands and reputations. Remember that Volkswagen example a few minutes ago? And where the products significantly depend on extracting large amounts of natural resources. So on the one hand, we cannot tolerate most stories like the Volkswagen story. And on the other, the Danone case shows us that social entrepreneurship type behavior can be mainstreamed into business, and momentum might be building. So my hope is that big business and social entrepreneurs will combine forces so that we can leverage the best of both, the scale and the might of business, and the future-fit metrics and mindsets of social entrepreneurs. So conclusion, so what? What can you all do? Try to find a way to bring your experience as a social entrepreneur into a business. Challenge those barriers, preventing them from measuring success in a more holistic way. Don't focus on the companies that don't need your help. The companies, with the exception of Volkswagen that I named here, don't need your help. But there are very many other, literally hundreds or thousands of other companies that could use it. Focus on the ones we need to help change, whose capabilities, capital, and market presence would help us if they succeeded. And here's 3 practical ways. One is, if you're a social entrepreneur, consider partnering with one. Find the intersection between a social problem that you're interested in and a problem that the business has, and see if you can help them solve for both. 2, this is maybe the most provocative one for those of you who have chosen to be social entrepreneurs, is go to work for one. Join one. Your mindset, your skills, and your experience can help, and you might learn too. 3, get bought. Build a social entrepreneurship-based business that gets bought by one of these companies. Unilever has been on such a buying spree with Ben & Jerry's and 7th Generation, who are incidentally both from Vermont. I have to brag a little bit there. I'm sorry, it's not in the script, but I couldn't keep it in. But interestingly, they have not subsumed those companies and erased them into a big global organization. They've allowed them to continue to exist and perform under their own brands and leadership so that the big global company can learn from them. So get bought and teach that way. That's also another interesting option. I'm going to share a little-known fact about Adam Smith. Smith was often vilified as the genie of crony capitalism, the man who gave conceptual license to profit at all costs. But I was very surprised to learn that this was not Smith's vision, actually. He believed that human choices were motivated by the desire to be of good character, and that the movement of the invisible hand, the machinery of the market, would be guided by that desire to have good character and to do good by each other. And I quote, "What so great happiness is to be beloved, and to know that we deserve to be beloved? What so great misery as to be hated, and to know that we deserve to be hated?" I believe that most leaders, regardless of whether they work as a social entrepreneur or in a big business, get out of bed in the morning with the same desire to do work that is worthy of love and not hatred. Your talent is our most precious resource. Please use it wisely. Thank you very much.